Sweetheart, who is this man to you?
He's my daddy.
She is my daughter, sir.
I didn't ask you. Is he telling you to say that, sweetheart?
No.
Sheriff Harlan Crow had already made up his mind before he asked a single question. He stood over the corner booth at Rosie's Diner on a Saturday morning in urban Texas, looking at a black man sitting across from a white 6-year-old in a paper birthday crown. And what he saw was not a family. What he saw was a problem that needed resolving. He had no evidence, no detailed distress call, no visible sign of fear from the child. Just an image, a black man, a white girl, and 14 years of unchecked instinct telling him what that image meant. He dismissed the ID. He waved off the judicial badge photo. He ignored the guardianship documents and the woman behind the counter who had served this table every Saturday for 3 years. Then he reached across the birthday pancakes, pulled Abraham Henry out of that booth in handcuffs, and did all of it in front of a terrified 6-year-old on her birthday. What Harlan Crow did not know, what he had no interest in finding out, was that the calm, composed black man he had just cuffed was a sitting United States district judge with 15 years on the federal bench. And that single arrogant decision would end his career, expose a pattern of 7 prior racially biased stops he thought had stayed buried, and cost the county $2,300,000. Before we go any further, drop your city or state in the comments. We love seeing where you're watching from. And if you believe no child should ever spend her birthday watching her father get handcuffed for the crime of being black in a diner, like this video and subscribe. Sheriff Harlan Crow moved through Rosie's Diner the way he moved through every space with the practiced authority of a man who had spent 14 years being the largest presence in any room he entered. He scanned as he walked. He categorized. He sorted. The call from dispatch had been vague. A neighbor somewhere nearby, a woman who said something felt off, an older black man with a young white girl, and Crow had been rolling toward the diner before the description was finished. He spotted the booth immediately. He did not slow down. He did not look for signs of distress in the child. He did not consider the birthday crown, the untouched whipped cream, the easy posture of a man with nowhere else to be. He crossed the floor and stopped at the table and asked the little girl who the man across from her was. She told him without hesitation. She said he was her daddy. Crow asked again, differently the way a man asks again, when he has already decided the first answer was coached. The girl's face shifted, not into doubt, into the particular confusion of a child who understands that something in the room has changed and cannot find a reason for it. The man across from her set down his coffee cup. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He identified himself by name, explained that he had identification, a judicial badge photo on his phone, guardianship paperwork, and offered all of it without hesitation. The woman behind the counter, who had been watching from the moment Crow walked in, came forward and told him in plain language that she knew this man and this child, that they were in this booth every single Saturday, that they were family. Crow waved her back. He looked at neither the phone nor the documents. He reached for his radio. He called it in as a possible abduction. He described the man as non-compliant. The diner went silent. Forks stopped. Conversations dropped. Every phone in the room was already out. Crow told the man to stand. The man stood. The cuffs came out. The little girl's hand shot across the table. Small fingers reaching across the space between them, reaching for something being taken before she understood how or why. The birthday crown slipped sideways. She whispered one word, barely audible, in the direction of the man being pulled away from her. Daddy. He did not look away from Crow. He stood still. And in the measured tone of a man who had spent 15 years on the federal bench, speaking only when the moment required it, he said, he was United States District Judge Abraham Henry. That he had offered proof of this, that every recording device in the room would confirm exactly what had transpired. Crow smiled, the particular smile of a man who believes the room still belongs to him. The cuffs clicked shut. The birthday crown completed its slow slide off the edge of the table and fell to the floor. Lily sat completely still. Her eyes did not move from her father's face as the sound of backup sirens started somewhere outside and began, steadily, to grow. That was the morning it ended for Harlan Crow. But to understand what he had actually done, to understand the full weight of those 11 minutes, you have to understand what that booth was. 3 years earlier, Abraham Henry's world had reorganized itself in the particular way that grief reorganizes everything quietly, permanently, without asking permission. His wife had spent 4 months in a hospital bed, and in her final days she had done what people with very little time left do with whatever time remains. She had made him promise, not about the accounts. Not about the arrangements, about Lily, about the Saturday mornings, about the specific, irreplaceable quality of attention a child needs when the person who understood her best is no longer there to provide it. He had promised. He had become Lily's legal guardian in the months that followed, and he had turned the paperwork of that grief into the architecture of something new, a family built on loss, but not defined by it. Every Saturday, without exception, they came back to the corner booth at Rosie's. Same seat, same order. Extra whipped cream, always. Elena Ramirez, who had been waitressing at Rosie's longer than most of the tables had been standing, refilled his black coffee before he asked, and slipped the birthday crown onto Lily's head the moment they walked in. Because she knew. She knew the order. She knew Lily always got to go first. She knew the half-nod Abraham gave when he was ready, and the way Lily always changed her mind at the last second and went back to what she had wanted all along. These were not details anyone had explained to her. They were simply things that had become true over time, the way all real familiarity becomes true without ceremony through the patient accumulation of ordinary mornings. Abraham Henry was 65 years old. He had spent 15 years on the federal bench. He had presided over cases that required him to hold complexity without flinching, to read a room before it read itself to him, to absorb the weight of other people's worst moments without allowing that weight to collapse his composure. He was not a man who announced himself. He had learned, case by case and year by year, that the most durable form of authority is the kind that requires nothing external to sustain it. None of that had mattered to Harlan Crow. Crow had walked into that diner, looked at that booth, and seen a black man with a white child. He had acted on what that image meant to him before a word was spoken, before a document was offered, before a 6-year-old girl told him plainly and without confusion who her father was. He had ignored everything that contradicted the conclusion he had already reached, and he had reached across a birthday table and put a federal judge in handcuffs. The sirens outside were closer now. Lily had not moved. Her eyes had not left her father's face. The fallen crown lay on the floor beside the booth, and the whipped cream on her untouched pancakes had begun, slowly, to melt. The backup deputies arrived in under 4 minutes. 2 of them came through the front entrance and read the room the way officers read rooms that have gone completely silent carefully, with the alertness that comes from understanding silence as its own kind of information. Crow intercepted them before they reached the booth. He kept his voice low and his posture confident. He described a non-cooperative subject, a suspicious situation, a man who had refused to produce appropriate documentation and resisted lawful questioning. He did not mention the phone. He did not mention the guardianship papers. He did not mention Elena, who stood 3 feet away with her arms crossed and her jaw set, watching every word come out of his mouth. One of the deputies, a sergeant 12 years on the job, the kind of careful that comes from watching what happens when assumption outruns procedure, did not defer immediately to Crow's framing. He looked at Abraham. He looked at Lily, sitting exactly where she had been sitting when the cuffs went on, birthday pancakes untouched, the fallen crown still on the floor. He looked at the dozen phones still recording from every angle in the room. Then he pulled out his own phone. He navigated to the Federal District Court's official website for the Northern District of Texas. He typed a name. The page loaded in seconds. The official portrait appeared at the top, a formal photograph, the kind taken at the beginning of a judicial appointment and updated at intervals across a long tenure. The man in that photograph was the man standing in handcuffs against the far wall of the diner. The biography listed 15 years of service. The title at the top of the page read, United States District Judge. The sergeant looked at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Then he crossed the room, said something quietly and directly to Abraham Henry, and removed the handcuffs himself. The apology he offered was brief and sincere. He repeated it. Abraham accepted it without performance, the way a man accepts something inadequate but genuine, with acknowledgement and without prolonged attention, because prolonged attention was not what the moment required. Crow had not moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing when the sergeant crossed the room, and the color that left his face the moment the screen loaded had not come back. The stillness that had settled over him was the stillness of a man watching a specific future dissolve in real time, not some abstract consequence down the road, but the immediate, irreversible reality of the next 5 seconds, and the 5 after that, and every professional morning that would follow. 14 years, a badge, a pension, a career built on the assumption that his read of a room was always correct. He had been in Rosie's diner for 11 minutes. Elena Ramirez had been waiting. She had recognized Abraham Henry the first morning he ever walked through Rosie's door, not from that Saturday, but from years before it. from a period in her own life when she had been trying to get through law school on waitressing shifts and financial aid that never quite covered what the degree actually cost. She had received an anonymous scholarship in her second year. She had never been able to confirm the source, but she had worked it out gradually. The way you work out the logic of something generous, when the generous person has taken deliberate care not to be found a name on a mentorship roster, a pattern of giving that matched a particular kind of quiet consistency. She had said nothing in 3 years of Saturday mornings. That was his choice to keep, and she had respected it. She did not respect Harlan Crow's choices. She stepped forward into her room, still recording everything, and she spoke. About what she knew of Abraham Henry, not as a judge, but as the kind of person who funds law school for someone he barely knows because he believes in what that person is trying to become. About 3 years of watching him with Lily, the patience, the consistency, the unhurried attention of a father who had built an entire weekly ritual around making sure one little girl always had a Saturday morning to count on. Her voice held the steadiness of someone releasing something long held from a place it no longer needs to be kept. Every recording in that room picked up every word. Abraham did not speak immediately when the cuffs came off. He stood still. He walked to the booth, picked up the birthday crown from the floor, crossed the room, and knelt in front of Lily. He set the crown back on her head gently, the same small adjustment he always made when it tilted too far to one side. He pressed his lips to her forehead. She leaned into his shoulder the way children lean when fear releases all at once, completely, rather than gradually. In the silence that followed, he spoke. He said that the robe should never have been what stopped those cuffs. That his rights as a father, as a person, should have been sufficient before any title entered the room. That what Crow had seen first, acted on first, and organized every subsequent decision around was not behavior or evidence or documentation. It was his skin. And that decision, single, unexamined, institutional, had put his daughter through the worst 11 minutes of her 6-year-old life on her birthday. He said it with the same precision he used to deliver rulings. No theater, no heat, the weight of a true thing, stated plainly, needing nothing added to it. Then he set the crown properly on Lily's head, ordered her pancakes warmed up, and asked Elena for a fresh coffee. The footage left the diner before they did. By midnight, 4 million people had watched Lily's small hand reach across the birthday table. By morning, it had doubled. The image that anchored every broadcast package and every news article was not the moment the cuffs went on. It was that hand, small fingers, stretched across the space, reaching for something being taken before she understood why. That image did not require a caption. As the footage looped across screens from one end of the country to the other, one question surfaced in the comment sections and conversations that followed, returning with the insistence of something people could not stop. Had they ever watched a moment where bias moved faster than truth? Had they ever stood in a room where what someone looked like overrode everything the situation was actually saying? If that lands close to home, type yes or no in the comments. And if you believe black fathers deserve the same unremarkable peace at a birthday breakfast that every other family in that diner had that morning, share this with someone who needs to see it. Within 48 hours of the footage going public, the first internal inquiry request was filed inside the sheriff's department. It came not from anyone in seniority, but from a junior deputy who had watched the video 3 times and then gone looking through the department's prior complaint files for patterns that now seemed impossible to unsee. He found them almost immediately. The investigation that followed was not the kind that required much investigation. The pattern was already in the files. Welfare check after welfare check, each one involving a black man in the company of a white child, each one initiated on a vague complaint or a stated instinct, each one resulting in detention, questioning, and the dismissal of whatever documentation the subject produced. 7 incidents, 14 years. 7 separate men who had stood in public spaces with their children biological, step, foster, and been treated as suspects because of what the image looked like to the person who made the call. None of those 7 reports had resulted in discipline. Each had been processed, cleared on its paperwork, and archived. The department had been aware without knowing which, is to say, it had seen the information without ever allowing it to become a finding. The footage from Rosie's Diner changed that calculation entirely. Harlan Crow was suspended without pay within 72 hours of the video reaching 8 million views, not because the department had arrived at a moral position. Because the evidentiary record was impossible to contain, and the reputational exposure of continued employment was a risk no administrator was willing to absorb, the suspension was framed as pending review. It lasted 9 days before the review produced a termination recommendation. The recommendation was accepted without appeal. 14 years ended in a letter. Abraham Henry's attorneys filed the federal civil rights complaint within the week: unlawful detention, racial profiling in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments, intentional infliction of emotional distress upon a minor. The evidentiary record was extraordinary: 11 video recordings providing overlapping angles of the entire encounter, Elena Ramirez's statement running 14 pages, the department's own archived complaint files providing the pattern evidence that converted an individual incident into a systemic finding. There was no version of this case that went to trial and produced a favorable outcome for the county. The county's attorneys understood this. Settlement negotiations began within 3 weeks of the filing and concluded in 75 days. The settlement reached $2,300,000. Abraham did not hold a press conference. He did not grant interviews. He released one statement through his attorneys that the protections the law provides must belong to every person who walks into a public space with their child, not as a function of what title they can prove, but as a function of their basic human dignity. That the cuffs should have come off the moment a man said he was a father and a child said he was her daddy. That nothing which followed, no badge photo, no documents, no 15 years of federal judicial service, should have been necessary. He said it once and did not repeat it. From the settlement, he directed a substantial portion to 2 organizations. One focused on legal advocacy against racial profiling, the other providing therapeutic services to children who had experienced traumatic police encounters. The remainder went into a trust for Lily's education, structured carefully, the way a man who had spent 15 years watching other people's futures pass through his courtroom structures something meant to protect the future of someone he loves. He returned to the bench the Monday after the settlement was finalized and sat where he had been sitting for 15 years, behind a bench that had, if anything, become more legible to him in the weeks since a Saturday morning at Rosie's Diner had reminded him what it feels like to stand on the other side of institutional power without a title to offset it. The reforms that followed were not dramatic. They rarely are. Mandatory bias training for all sworn personnel. A new review protocol for welfare check calls requiring supervisory sign-off when the basis for the call was subjective. An independent audit mechanism for racial profiling complaints. The kinds of changes announced in press releases and measured across years, their durability depending entirely on whether the people responsible for maintaining them believe the effort is worth it when no one is watching. Abraham believed it was. He had spent 15 years believing that, not as sentiment, but as method. 1 year later, on the morning of Lily's 7th birthday, Abraham Henry pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner. At the same time, they always arrived early enough for the corner booth, late enough for the coffee to be ready. Elena had called ahead the week before. When she asked if they were coming for the birthday, he said yes, same as always. The corner booth had a small laminated card on the table when they arrived, set beside the napkin holder. It read, "Reserved Henry family." Elena had placed it there herself, without asking permission and without being asked. She brought the pancakes before they ordered. Extra whipped cream, black coffee, orange juice with a straw. She set the birthday crown on the table between them rather than on Lily's head, because Lily was 7 now and preferred to put it on herself. The crown had been laminated too. Elena had done that in the weeks after the video, when it became clear that the original paper, one slightly crumpled, creased from a morning that had almost gone very differently, deserved to be preserved. She had pressed it flat, laminated it carefully, and put it in a drawer behind the counter. She brought it out every year. Lily put it on at an angle, the same angle as always. She reached across the table for a piece of Abraham's bacon, the same reach, the same negotiation, the same outcome. Abraham let her take it. He watched her settle back into her seat with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully claimed something they were going to get anyway, and the corner booth held the warm, unremarkable light of a Saturday morning in Texas, and the coffee was good, and the whipped cream was excessive, and everything was exactly as it should be. No one had stolen their Saturdays. They never would.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.